So today we're going to talk about how to train agents that every commercial real estate brokerage wants. And for that, I've got George Spino. He's the CEO of Commercial Brokers International here in Los Angeles, my business partner. George does all the training for all our company, Commercial Brokers International, every morning at 8:30 a.m. And then again, it closes out at 5 p.m. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we do and a little bit about what George has done to get to what he's doing with these classes. George, I want to go back into negotiation skills because we kind of dipped into market knowledge. I do want to come back to that, but I want to get back to negotiations. How are you preparing the newer agents for training them on negotiations?
Okay. Well, on the preparation, it's really understanding. We're trying to take an empathetic approach to it, meaning put yourselves in the other person's shoes. Because if you understand where the other person that you're negotiating against, what their goals are, it's going to make your life a lot easier to get there. But to do that, you also have to be able to take into account everything else, the reading of the person, what they're saying, how they're saying it. Also understand that some people are going to use these same strategies against you, same tactics against you. So you can't buy into it necessarily. You have to know when to stand firm on what you believe to be the best negotiating part. Part of what we teach is that, you know what, two of the biggest mistakes when it comes to negotiating, number one is getting emotions involved.
Yeah.
You know, I always tell people.
We've all been there.
No, we all have. I have. I've recently done it myself. You know, and meaning it was obviously with the other broker, and there was I was like, oh my god, I can't believe they're even asking that. Well, how could you have your client do that? And I shouldn't have. But you know, it was such a shock what they asked. I'm not even going to get into it, but it was shocking. So it's rare. But at the same time, we always train our agents to take the emotion out of it, you know, because a lot of times this is personal. It necessarily shouldn't be. It should be a business transaction, but ultimately we're talking about money, which can be personal to a lot of people. So your sellers or your buyers may get emotional about it. So it's for us to be able to take that emotion out and actually just go back with the facts and be able to explain, well, here's where we are. Here's what would you like to do? Here's where we're at. Here's where I believe we can get to. What is the course of action that you'd like to take, and we're going to guide that boat over to it so we get it into the dock. Taking that out, that's the number one problem in negotiating. The number two problem is over negotiating. When to stop. You know, it's the funny part was. The reason why I bring this up is this actually just happened to one of our agents recently, where she has a great international client coming in, looking up to set up locations. We've done already 5 leases in the first month of working with them. Well, we found a location for them, and they liked the location a lot. It's also, they went in and they started negotiating with it, and the agent on the other side literally said, you know, they came back basically at asking price. But when we look at it, like, this is a little bit above market. Realistically, is this where your client's at, or is, you know, are we wasting our time here because our client's not going to pay this? His exact words were, I'm negotiating. I'm a negotiator. That's what I do for my clients. Well, he goes, just get me a counter. We gave a counter back, but he gave us almost the identical counter back to us. And we said, well, you asked us to counter this process, and that you thought you can get it to work. And he came back with, I'm a negotiator. Cut to, we're close to near the deal being done after about 3 weeks of negotiating, which should have taken 1. And our client goes out to the property. And our agent, unfortunately, was on a business trip and wasn't able to attend it, and they were fine because the deal was almost already done. And this agent tries to negotiate again. Cut to half an hour later, our agent's getting a call from their client saying, we're done with this space, and I don't ever want to talk and deal with that agent ever again. He just basically negotiated himself out of a deal. And I don't think his client would have been happy either with it, because
Absolutely not.
I don't think that it was all about some of the stuff that they were trying to negotiate or say. It was stuff that we'd already agreed upon. And he was trying to renegotiate at the last minute. And that just made everybody have a bad taste in their mouth. and just walk away from the deal.
Over negotiations.
Yep.
It's not that uncommon in our industry, though, is it?
It's not, because sometimes the agents think that they have to win,
Yeah.
and they lose track of the fact that winning is getting what the client wants, not
Yeah.
what you want.
Right. And sometimes
And-
that's best if everybody wins a little bit.
Exactly.
I want to go back on to market knowledge now. Something that you really push the agents on is their first 2 weeks when they come on with the company, no cold calling. It's study your market knowledge. So if you're an investment broker in Santa Monica, multifamily, you better know every multifamily building that's on the market, how long it's been on the market, average size of the units, price per square foot, what's the average days on market, what everything's sold for in the year over the last 6 months to a year. That is a lot to take in for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's probably what makes these agents probably the most successful, is because they've taken the time to really understand that market before they actually get on the phones. And that is something that, having that market knowledge makes them more sustainable. They're going to be able to take that on into their career, because now once they've learned it all, because it can be daunting taking that all in right away, but there's not that much activity in a certain marketplace, they can pick it up pretty quickly. So I think that is something that is a winning proposition that's done. But can you go into how that does translate? How do you train them on how important that is?
Absolutely. Market knowledge is, I think it's two factors. One is the micro market itself, where they're actually working, having that knowledge, having understanding of, like you said, days on market, number of inventory, average turnover rates, things like that, right? And what the concession rates are if you're doing leasing, everything going into it. That's relatively easy to actually get nowadays, because there's a lot of data tools out there that can put that out. We're not building parrots to regurgitate the information out to an owner, because that really doesn't bring any value. So instead, what we're also doing as part of that market knowledge is the understanding of both the macroeconomics and the microeconomics, meaning here's the market data, but how do you interpret it? And that's where the training comes in. It's not the market data. The agent has to take that step and learn that data themselves. We'll show them how to find it, how to get it, what to look for, what key metrics to be aware of. But if they don't understand how those metrics interact with one another, such as, we might have an absorption rate that's declining heavily, showing that there's a lot more interest in the property, and vacancy rates are going down. So what does that mean? Well, supply and demand laws means that rental rates are probably going to go up. So now I can convey that to potential clients, that here's what's happening. Maybe we, like if you're working with the tenant, let's lock in rental rates now before they go up. If you're, working with landlords, maybe we can be a little firmer on negotiating because on increases or whatever the case may be, because we're seeing that there's a lot more interest in that property. But if the agents don't understand how to analyze the data, then they might as well not have even, anyone can sit there and say average days on market's 48 days, and we have 14 properties on the inventory with between 2 and 5 million in the 90402 zip code, this. The problem is, if they don't understand what that means, they're not adding any value.
Right.
And so we try and train how everything interacts, not just the economic side of it, but also different asset classes. Also debt markets. Mm-hmm. What's going on in the debt market? How is that going to affect buyers? What's going on in the general business economy itself? We start looking at CPI. We start looking at gross domestic product. When I was first when I first got into the business, one of the things that was really an eye-opener for me was a mentor of mine. We were sitting there talking about reading the newspaper, and not just for the news, but rather, what does it mean? So, and what I mean by that is, he brought up an article that was out there, and this happened to be at a residential office that I was sitting in on the meeting, and it was the Los Angeles Business Journal, one of our Bibles if in commercial real estate, right? Mm-hmm. So we're reading it all the time, but he came out and he, at this residential office, said, how many of you read the Los Angeles Business Journal? Only a handful of people came up. He goes, well, in this newspaper today, there's a story about a company that's moving their headquarters to Los Angeles. Most agents were like, you know what? I don't do commercial real estate. I'm residential. So what is that? How does that affect me? And his response was, well, every single one of those
You need a place to
people need a place to live.
Yeah.
You got to transfer. Well, take that concept out. If we're reading the stories and we see that a company's expanding or see that a company's been acquired, what is the next logical step? You know, they're going to perhaps they may need more industrial space if they're doing distribution. You know, they may need more retail space. Looking out for it. You have to be able to interpret and read what's happening to be able to create the business.
I also think it's going to help the agent make money a lot faster. If they completely understand what's going on in the marketplace, they get somebody on the phone that they're cold calling. You know, they're not just saying, hey, are you thinking about buying or selling properties? You know, they can talk about, hey, did you see that this, X number of properties are in the marketplace in your area? Are you considering selling or buying other properties? Having that market knowledge is going to get them generating revenue a lot sooner.
Absolutely, and it can also allow you to utilize it for sales as well, which we'll get into a little bit later as far as some sales techniques.
All right, let's jump into how you're training them to do marketing. So we've got content creation, blog writing, emails, writing articles, getting reviews. How are you tackling that? Because that's something that is really happening right now. Younger generations getting into commercial real estate. It's attractive to them. They want to be able to market themselves. So I know it's something you're focusing on. How are you training that?
Number one, it's when we talk about content creation, I think the key word is content. Too many people focus on creation.
Right.
And, ultimately we want to make sure that the content that we're putting out, number one, first and foremost, before anything else, the content that you put out as a real estate agent should be directed to your audience. Okay? Speaking of which, I had a young agent here that last year that was, in his mind, TikTok famous. He had 50 times more followers, 100 times more likes than I ever did have.
Right.
And, at one point, he had never got any business from any of his social media, real estate, TikTok stuff.
Right.
Meanwhile, I may only have 100, 200, 300 views or likes on certain posts I've done or videos, but it's generated hundreds of thousands of dollars for me in additional revenue. So my point to him was, I'm not doing this to become TikTok famous. I'm not doing it for likes. I'm doing it for business. So how is that going to interpret and go into your business? So you have to make sure that what you're putting out there is the image that you want to create for yourself, the professionalism, but also that you're putting out key information that your clients want to see and hear before anyone else does, preferably.
Right.
So from there, once we have that down, okay, and we have a whole marketing program where we can sit down and say, well, do this on this day, do this on this day. So we're actually helping them create that content and what they need to put and how to go about it, because we know what people like. We've been in the business long enough to have been able to understand what gets leads versus views. And so we work with that, but it's also, we have to understand that it's a little bit more encompassing than just putting it out there. Part of what we also train is consistency, SEO, working with not just putting it on your social, but cross-marketing it with different socials, working with your social, your sphere of influence, working with other partners, meaning, if I'm putting content out and it happened to be a video, I'm going to try and hashtag everybody out there. But we're also teaching them the tricks of the trade of what hashtags works, how to comment back, how, for instance, key tip for everybody, if you comment thank you, it doesn't read. You want to get at least 5 words in there. Yeah. So, if someone makes a comment and you just respond thank you, it doesn't add to your SEO. Instead, try and get them engaged. Come back and 5 words minimum, but also maybe ask them another question so they respond again. It can be all kinds of stuff, but you want to make sure the responses are what you want. You're not doing it just for the response. You're doing it to feed back into the content that you're creating.
And teaching them the analytics.
Absolutely.
Which I think, is something you said earlier. It doesn't get measured. It doesn't get What's
Tracked.
Tracked. No, not if it doesn't get measured. What gets measured gets
Managed.
managed. That's the word I want. I read that years ago. No, that's pretty good. Can you walk me through how you're training that? Well, I think the key thing is when you do post something, go into the platform and take a look at the analytics. You know how many likes it's got, how many
Yeah.
people made comments, and all that. And then you can kind of take your content and you can focus it on that. You want to look at this maybe every I don't think every day, but maybe every day, every month, every week, or every year. You really break down what's working for you, what's not, and then really focus on what's working and what's not pulling for you. Just don't even bother with it.
Yep, no, it's the self-reflection. It goes back to, I think that's one of the core of our training process
Right.
for agents. It's to constantly analyze what you've done and how you've done things. So you're looking at those metrics, like you said, the likes, and understanding, like, why did this get 2 or 3 times as many likes as this other post?
Right.
There may be a reason. Was it timing? Was it, just something of real interest? Maybe some news popped up the same day about the exact same thing that drove it. Who knows? It could maybe even be your hashtags. You want to see what you're doing and where you're putting it out there. But it's that constant analyzing to be able to get your posts or your marketing to the next level. And
Right.
I know that ours is at the next level because I know that 3 of our agents last year won awards for their marketing. They've all been able to generate inbound leads through their marketing, and so I know it does work.
Yeah. Well, we're very fortunate that we've got the head of marketing that's also got her master's from USC.
Well, I think the USC thing is what really plays a key in that.
She might agree. She might agree with you. All right, George. Let's move on to CRMs. Very important part to any commercial real estate broker's career path. How are you training them to utilize this tool?
It's the CRMs are great. I mean, number one, it is contact relationship management, making sure that you're staying in contact. But the issue is that a lot of people don't necessarily use it to its full capabilities. So we're training them to actually taking in information that they can use for sales, meaning really start pinpointing the details of your clients and little things such as anniversary dates, anniversary of move-in dates, lease
Right.
dates, acquisition of properties. Also, any personal data though, because these are all additional points of contact that allows you to stay in contact with them. And more importantly, if you're utilizing personal data like birthdays, or maybe it's a big anniversary, wedding anniversary, or things like that, and you're reaching out to them, you're taking it out of a realm of just business, and you're actually creating more of a relationship. And that's going to be something that's going to be long term, where they're going to be thinking of you constantly and coming back to you. Even if they're not necessarily using you, your clients, when you reach out to them, are going to at least refer you or think about you when someone else brings it up. So that's how we're really training our agents to actually utilize the CRMs to the best possible way. In addition to that, obviously, are the efficiencies it creates. So, we start working with the agents and start working with them on their CRMs and start really focusing on different types of groups that they may want to email to, like break it up with your, here's all your agents, here's all your investor clients, here are your tenant clients if you're working in that side, or industrial clients, however you may be working, whatever you may be doing in the commercial real estate. Break it up so that this way when you're sending out content, you can actually sit there and instead of handpicking and choosing and taking the time to send out 200 emails that are specifically to your investor clients, you can just do one and say, hey, through my CRM, I'm going to send out one email that's going to be customized, but it'll go out to all 200. It saves everybody that much more time of organizing and sending it out. So we're really using that part of it and reinforcing the efficiencies that can be created, but also how to use it as a sales tool more importantly.
I also think if you are part of a team,
Mhm.
it's very important
Oh,
that you
absolutely.
guys are, as a team,
Yeah.
utilizing that tool. All right, let's move on to business development, the lifeblood of any commercial real estate agent. Walk us through the training that you're giving your agents at Commercial Brokers International.
Well, number one, first thing we always tell them, and this is counterintuitive to a lot of other companies, but I always tell agents, you're never going to sell anything over the phone other than yourself. So stop trying to sell real estate. That is not what you're trying to do. You instead are looking to sell yourself to get an appointment in front of them to talk about what they need.
Building a relationship.
So we're truly building a relationship, and we have a different approach to it where we're actually, it's multiple contact points, it's following up, it is, initially starting off just with an introduction, and then going from there, getting as much information as you can, but also understanding what your clients want, what their motivation is, so that you can really, when you understand that, then you can adjust your pitch to apply directly to what they're looking for. So part of our business development is, number one, strategies on breaking into certain marketplaces. Whether it's like for our retail agents, we have what we call like a block program, where they're going to go in, they're going to become the professional, the go-to person for a block. They're going to do that by both personally visiting every single one of the retail locations, introducing themselves to the owners, as well as calling them, and then getting information from them, but just talking to them. Well, explaining, here's who I am, keeping up to date with them, using like a monthly update list, and then as they are known in that block, they can then expand their territory to the next block, and the next block from there. More importantly, they're also going to get inside information. People like to talk about other people. So, when the tenant's going to talk about it, they might get some insight into, oh, by the way, that tenant down the street's having some problems. So you're able to go in, and you're able to get a foot in the door, or you can even contact that landlord and say, I understand that you have a vacancy coming up that they're moving out in a month, and they're probably going to be like, how'd you know that? And say, my response is just something that's a little coy and shy in the sense of, well, it's my job to know that. Mm-hmm. Isn't that who you want to hire?
Absolutely.
And so, kind of turn it on them. You don't have to give your sources out. You don't have to do anything along those lines. Just be honest about it. And the fact is, it is your job to know about that. And you should know about that within your own marketplace if you're the professional there. And if you can indicate and show that, then that client's going to want to use you down the road. So that's the first step, is really creating that breaking into the marketplace. Now we also look at who we can target. Who's the most likely clients? What are they looking to do? So, we have different tools to analytical data available. We look at move-in dates. When did somebody move in? We know that the average lease term time is 3 to 5 years, depending on the submarket and the location that
this
you're
is on
in.
retail again?
So on retail, but also in office space.
Okay.
Office space is 3 to 5 years as well, typically speaking. Retail can go up to 10 or so. So we're really targeting those people that have moved in the last 2 years, 2.5 years for lease renewals that we can keep, because a lot of agents don't follow up and keep in touch.
Right.
So they're going to lose those clients. But if we're the ones out there and we can explain why it's a good time now. We're also teaching them different strategies that are maybe not necessarily they're common, but not necessarily utilized very often, such as a blend and extend. When you have rising rental rates that you're expecting, it's a great time to extend that lease and blend out those rates. The landlord's happy for a longer term lease. The tenant's happy because they're able to lock in a rental rate at a lower rate than what's anticipated in a year or 2 years from now when their lease comes due. So everyone, it's a win-win situation there. And so we're using these strategies and explaining, well, this is your in. This is how you're going to go in as far as business development. But initially it starts off with just creating that relationships, then understanding what the motivation of the client is, what their pain points are, and how we can fix those pain points with real estate strategies and tactics, commercial real estate things.
Okay, that's great on retail and office. What are you doing for investment sales?
Investment sales, it's pretty much the same thing. You want to identify,
Yeah.
what their pain points are and what they're looking to do. Obviously, most of them are looking to either expand or they're looking to sell, potentially to take advantage of the market. And so we're looking for that as well, meaning, yes, the majority is cold call. Number one, highest, biggest return, not just for investment sales, but across the board. I think any type of sales is going to be cold calling. Getting in front of them, it's going to be the fastest way to get the exposure and get in front of specific people that you would need to get a hold of. But with investment sales now, we're really targeting and looking to try and target different potential sellers. You know, what makes a seller want to sell? I mean, you obviously have the 3 Ds, you know, death, divorce, disease. And I don't like to be a predatory ambulance chaser type of agent, so I'm not necessarily going after those. But at the same time, I know that commercial loans have, you know, they reset every 10 years essentially. Most commercial loans have a due date of in 10 years. So I'm looking for those that are people who may have tied in, if we're in a rising interest rate scenario, I'm looking for people that may be hurting a little bit on their cash flow because interest rates have gone up and they've used an adjustable versus a fixed mortgage. And then when they reset, they may not be able to refinance or reset, so they may have to sell. So we're targeting a lot of those people who to go after. We're at the same time, you're still targeting people, you know, same asset class, because, you know, there's the old saying that the most likely buyer of any property is the next door neighbor.
Right.
You know, everybody's played Monopoly. Everyone understands that there are synergies to owning multiple properties on a street that are next to each other. And you can build larger, you can do more, and you have synergies of scale. So the most likely buyer, if they can afford to do it, is going to be the neighbor.
Right.
So we're targeting all of that, looking to see who's doing what's in the marketplace, what are they changing things. Also, when it comes to investment strategies, one of the things that we do with our investment sales is we're packaging properties for the clients,
Gotcha.
meaning we're explaining why this is a good investment for them. And I'm not talking about, you know, doing a 48-hour in-depth analysis with timelines and what your hold period's going to be and what your investment horizon looks like and all that. I'm saying here are the key points, here's what to look out for, here's why this property is good. We've noticed that by doing so, by disseminating some of that information and putting it in front of our clients, it helps them make a decision quicker, but it also gets them to come back and take a look at it a little bit more so. Meaning, if it's certain key things, like for instance, recently one of my investment sales I did was in a tertiary town in Texas. But and I know for a fact that if I sent out the property information to the landlord or to the buyer, they probably would have passed on it just looking at the name of the town. Like, where's that? What's that? What is this? But when we started delving into it, we found out that this was a 93 percentile store for that chain. So it was in the top 7 percentile of all the deal volume. So very low chance of them moving out. In addition to that, we started delving into the location and found out that the location was a very hard to replicate location. They were in the best location for the town and for the area that they were in. So taking all that in consideration, we came back in and we had a long-term corporate guarantee on the lease. We put this and put the synopsis in place. And all of a sudden, our client's now interested because it's a 97th percentile location.
Sure.
They weren't interested in anything else, but that mitigates the risk of the company going out of business, and therefore it's more of a sure investment. But at the same time, we're getting a higher return because it's a little bit more in a tertiary town. So it's a win-win for the investor if they can go in and find a property like that. So by doing that, we were able to actually make that sale.
Okay. That's great advice, by the way. Time management and organizational skills. Now, this has got to be hard to teach for somebody that's getting in and they really want to get that first deal under their belt. So this process, I know, can be time-consuming. Got a few agents that are just, they want to get that first deal done. They don't care about the size, you know. So organization, you know, they really are kind of all over the place. So I know you're spending a lot of time with them on their time management and their organizational skills. So can you kind of walk us through what you're doing?
Absolutely. So, you know, I will actually spend time personally with every single one of the agents to try and work out a schedule for them that works for what they're trying to accomplish. Now, obviously, schedules have to be fluid. You can't sit there and say, 10 o'clock, I'm ending this listing appointment meeting because I got cold calls to make.
Sure.
It's going to be fluid depending on what your other appointments are and what's happening. But more importantly, I think the key thing to teach the agents is to triage the clients and the information that's coming in, just like they do at a hospital emergency room or anywhere else. You know, you have to take a look and say, does this need my immediate attention? Because there are times when that does happen in our industry.
Sure.
And you have to do something to save a deal or step in and do things. So you have to understand that, you know what, does this need my immediate attention, or is this something that can wait until later in the day when I'm less busy? to be able to do it? Or is this something that maybe, you know what, I don't need to do this until the evening, so I don't want to take up my business development time where I'm making cold calls and things. So, you don't want to, the last thing an agent wants to do is to look busy but not have any business, or be busy and not
They'll
doing
do
any
that.
business.
They'll do that because they don't want to do cold calls too. So
And they think
you got to monitor the production.
absolutely no. It goes back to the production, but with agents and explaining that this is where we can go back to the production levels is finding out where the issue is many times agents don't triage what's coming in, and then they get a another email coming in. They go, oh, I got to take care of that, and they jump on that. And I got to do this. Next thing you know, 3 hours later, they've made 2 phone calls for business development. They're not looking at their pipeline, and really, the pipeline. Everyone's talked about it, everyone's heard about it, where you have a pipeline of incoming business, current business, and then closing business, and a lot of people try and explain it as a third, but really that's not true. You're starting off as a new agent, you have no current clients, you have no closing business. So almost 100% of your time should be business development or the structure of your business, what you're going to be doing and creating for that. That's what all your time is. Now, as you get more clients, that's going to change, and you're going to spend maybe 50% of your time doing the cold calls and outreach and marketing and business development, and then maybe 30-40% of your time with current clients, and then as the closings happen, should only be about 10-20%. So it's really using how much your time and where, but also using the time efficiently. And I think that's one of the key things that a lot of people don't really train, or a lot of companies don't train, is what's important that needs to be addressed now versus what can wait later. And it sounds like common sense, but it's human nature that as things come in, you want to get it taken care of and get done right away, and it can distract you from actually doing what you're supposed to be doing.
And I think we always have to keep in mind that everybody's different. The structure that you have isn't going to work for me,
Oh, absolutely.
and vice versa. And so I think taking the time to sitting down with each and every agent and seeing what's going to work best for them is also the key. The process of onboarding a client, what kind of weight do you give that? Do you give that a lot of time in class?
In classes, we talk about onboarding clients, but I like to say it's more about qualifying the client,
Okay.
because I think that's the biggest part about onboarding the client.
Okay.
And when we talk about qualifications, it's not about how much money they have. It's not about their ability to purchase or lease space up, or their want or desires to do so. It's about their motivation ultimately. So when we onboard a client, we're talking about everything and trying to get a full understanding of the client's business, number one. So, because I can't tell you how many times the clients come to me with expectations of what they thought they needed for their business, but after discussing with them and talking to them, it was completely different, either size requirements or usage or location even. So, that's part of the conversation that we have. It's onboarding, understanding their business. What is their current business? What are their business goals? That's part of the onboarding process, because if they're looking to grow, it may be wiser to take a larger space now and grow into that space versus taking a small space, a space that fits today, but a year from now it's going to be too small and it's going to hurt the growth, because they either have to sublease, move, or have a satellite office, which is inefficient. So onboarding to me is more about understanding the client, everything about them. How are they going to securitize the property? How are they going to pay for the property? What's their current business look like? Is this an expansion process or a relocation? Everything about that client. From there, obviously it's the timing. We talk about timing, we talk about the motivation, what's going to happen. And, if it's a client at that point that we feel is realistic in what they're looking for, because that's part of the onboarding process. That's why we're asking all these questions. You can get through the whole process, and then there's that. Someone said this the other day. Champagne tastes and beer pockets.
Yeah.
So you don't want to work with someone who's unrealistic. That's not a client. A client is somebody who has the means and ability and the motivation to make something happen today,
Right.
right now.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. It's probably one of the most important parts of everything that you're doing is when you start off having all that data in there, because you can always refer back to it.
You'd be amazed at how many agents just you qualify. What? No. I don't need to qualify them. I just have a client.
Yeah, yeah, the onboarding and understanding where you're going.
Yeah.
The next question here is form completion and compliance. I know this is something that most companies struggle with new agents. Do you go through each form with them to make them understand it?
Either I or a person that's assigned. Well, for classes, absolutely.
Yeah. For
Number
classes.
one, we actually create checklists.
Right.
Okay, so when it comes to all the forms, we have all of the legally required forms on a checklist depending on the asset class and the type of transaction, whether it's a lease or a sale. Depending on the asset class, what multifamily versus retail versus office versus industrial, there's potentially different disclosures for every single one of them.
Okay.
So we go over those in detail in the classes because ultimately, these disclosures are being given by the agent. They better darn well know what they're talking about and disclosing.
Yeah.
And so they have to at least be able to explain it to their clients. They can't just say, this is a DRE required form, please sign it. That's not a disclosure. So, when we go over them, we go over all the forms. Also, what we try and do is we go over standardized purchase and sale agreements and standardized leases. And we look for the common things within that, or we highlight the common things within that that are typically negotiated and or changed. So we look for that and we talk to them and we talk about current market trends, like what is the typical earnest money deposit, or what is the typical annual increases for retail in this submarket. And we look at that and we're always constantly evaluating it and giving it to our agents. Most of them are pretty aware of it within their submarket, but we have that outside the area as well, as far as what is being happening in that current marketplace. So even if they're, like, let's say someone specializes in West Hollywood, but they have a client that's going to Beverly Hills, which is adjacent, and we still have that data that we can actually utilize and analyze as well.
Yeah. As a new agent, and I hear you when you're doing the classes struggling with this a little bit, a lot of the newer agents think just talking is important, when in fact it's listening. How do you get that across to them? How do you get them to understand that, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, listen to what your client wants. Don't just talk your way through it. You find it's difficult to train that?
I find it is difficult to train people because it's a habit.
Right.
People make
probably
this,
a nervous habit.
A nervous habit, but also people make the assumption that a salesperson has to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And many times the communication that someone has or the interactions you have, whether they're interpersonal or even or business or whatever else, is non-communicative. We talked about this a little bit earlier about how body language plays a key factor. Also tonality, things like that. So when we start looking at that with the agents and with their clients, we're trying to explain to them that many times, when you're going into a setting and you're pitching somebody on a sales, a lot of people are a little, they're held back. They're being conservative. They're not going to necessarily tell you where they stand. People are not necessarily as transparent or upfront until they trust you. Mm-hmm. Okay? And, and one of the keys, one of my favorite sayings is, and I think you're the one who actually brought it up, was people will talk to people they like, but they'll do business with people they trust.
Yeah, that's very true.
So you have to create that trust, and talking doesn't necessarily do it. What does do it is listening, finding out what is there, because ultimately, and this is what I ask every agent, is how do you know what the person wants?
Not by talking.
You'll never know by talking.
Yeah.
And,
you can't
and
close the deal.
explaining something or whatever else. The only way you're ever going to know what a client wants is by asking them and sitting back and listening. And also just listening not just to what they say, but how they're saying it and what they're saying. Because a lot of times it may not be what they necessarily want, but they're kind of hedging their bets or holding their cards close to the chest, so to speak. And so you have to listen to the nonverbal cues.
I think when we started, we really, the way things were, we didn't have a lot of technology, so we controlled the flow of data.
Oh, yeah.
That's not the case anymore.
No.
And I do hear more senior agents, they still are kind of thinking they're in control when the person sat across the table from them knows a lot about these properties and the market data already. And so I think it's not just the younger people doing it. I think it's some of the older people. You know, younger people, mostly it's nerves, because remember when we first started, you just went for it, right? You just went to close the deal. So, you know, I think that's something that we can all learn. I think, you know, we have a tendency of seeing a negotiation as a conflict. I think if we frame it differently, then you're going to have a lot better perspective. And you've got to remove that thought that it is a conflict, because it's not. You're trying to come to a means to an end. But I think there's something that we talked about fairly recently, and it's emotional intelligence. So if we're negotiating, I should be sitting here thinking about, what do you really need, and why are you asking me for this? You know, and I think if you really put yourself in the other people's shoes for a while, it's really going to help close some deals. Are you finding that as well?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're going to take an empathetic approach, and that's what we try and suggest, one, it creates that relationship, it creates that connection, but also you can have a really good understanding of where that person's coming from and what they're doing, so you know what key points are you don't want to bring up or do want to bring up. You know, and taking a step back, you know, if people are talking about negotiations as an argument, then I'm probably in an argument every other day with my wife talking about dinner plans, right? And it's not. We're just talking and finding out, well, what are you looking for? What do you want? What are you feeling? What would you like? Oh, you know what? I could go with that. It's now a negotiation. It's a meeting point. Find something in the middle ground. That's what we both want. She may have wanted pizza. I may have wanted pasta. Maybe we'll just get Italian. But you have to take that same mentality or thought process when you're negotiating on these deals. I mean, I'm not trying to trivialize that, you know, a $10-20 million deal is what your dinner plans are, but it's the same kind of concept, that when you go into it, you're not going to get tied up in the emotions of it. It's not an argument.
Right.
You're trying to find out deal points that'll work for all the parties involved. All the parties don't have to like 100% of it, but they all have to work for everybody to actually make a deal happen. So, you know, you can't get a great deal for one and a horrible deal for another, because likely it's not going to end up closing.
Yep.
You negotiate, and that's not negotiating. That's taking advantage of someone, or trying to take advantage of someone, which is typically going to blow up. So negotiating is finding the middle ground, finding out where it is, what are the key points, what do they want. I may not be able to get 100% of what they want, but I can deliver 80-90% of it, and it's better than what they could get anywhere else. That, to me, is a negotiation, and a good negotiation.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, I think another thing that and I don't want to toot our own horn here, but I do think the fact that we recorded all of your classes and put them on the YouTube channel, so agents can go back and refer to them even after they've gone through the class. I know some of them still want it in person, because they don't really, they feel they don't learn by watching videos. But I think that is something that everybody should be thinking about, as well as recording their classes, so their new agents can refer back to them.
Well, I think having a repository for what the classes are and what you do, not just, it doesn't have to be videos either.
Right.
I mean, we have a lot of forums, we have different things that they can go in and take a look at as well, about how to do things and how to look at how to, you know, how go about on the analysis side and things. So even glossaries, you know, we have all of that there, but you should also always have a resource for the agents. You know, we talked about continuing education earlier. I keep all our I have a whole library of different continuing education classes, ebooks, in our form folders.
Right.
That agents can access anytime if they ever need to reference or cross-reference what's going on as far as DRE regulations and their current business.
That'd be some tough reading.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'd be tapping into that.
Honestly, I'm not sure if I've ever opened it up after I put it in the forms folder. But
Sure,
yes.
a few of them have.
But yeah.
All right, well, George, this has been kind of a long video, so I want to let you get back at it. Thank you very much for coming on today. And for those of you watching, thank you for taking the time today. If you have any questions for George, please put it in the comments, and we'll make sure that he sees them and gets them answered for you. And if you could, please give us a like. And if you haven't done so, make sure you subscribe.